after a crazy race at Las Vegas to kick off these playoffs, there are several pretty big name drivers that currently find themselves on the wrong end of the playoff cut line. And while things may not seem too great right now, in today's episode, I'm going to tell you exactly how these drivers can still advance. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric and welcome back to Out of the Groove, classic midweek edition of the show. I hope you're having a wonderful Thursday. You know, this last weekend at Las Vegas, it was a crazy race. I made a whole episode Sunday night afterwards. If you missed it, go check it out. If you watched the race, you should know how insane it was. Felt like almost every playoff driver in the field was involved in some sort of wreck or incident. And as a result of all these shenanigans, we have a few pretty big name drivers that are currently in a deep, deep playoff hole after only one race. In today's episode, I want to primarily focus on those 4 drivers that are outside the top 12 currently, and I want to look at what they need to do, especially this weekend at Richmond, what they need to do to put themselves in a prime position to still move on. Because, you know, some of these guys, as we're about to see, are in a little bit of a hole. In some cases, almost a crater-sized hole. Things don't look good for some of these guys. But anyway, let's look at the playoff grid and go from there. There you see the current 16-car, 16-driver playoff field. You see the 4 drivers currently outside of the top 12. You have some big names. Jimmie Johnson, Chase Elliott, 2 of the anchors at Hendrick Motorsports. And then you've got Erik Jones and Denny Hamlin there in 15th and 16th. You have 2 great young guns there in Chase Elliott and Erik Jones. You've got the 7-time champion Jimmie Johnson, and then you've got Denny Hamlin, who lucky for him, he's going to one of his hometown track this weekend. Maybe he can turn things around, but we got some big names. So the first driver I want to talk about is, I guess I'll start with Denny Hamlin. He's in the worst spot of all of them. He is 20 points outside of the top 12. Denny Hamlin did not have a very good car at Las Vegas this last speedway. Really struggled with the handling all day and ultimately spun out in stage 3, and when he got into the infield grass, really tore up the entire front end, ended up in a DNF, a bad finish for him. That's why he is 20 points out. Big hole for Denny Hamlin to try and crawl out of, but he's a veteran and he's been doing this a while. He's typically been pretty good, so anything can happen. It might be a little bit of a long shot, but we do still have 2 races and the Roval is coming up, and that's going to be pretty, uncertain, pretty wild. But we're not going to look at that quite yet. The question is, how can Denny Hamlin still manage to advance? If you ask me, Denny Hamlin will advance to the round of 12 if he and his team can eliminate the mistakes. The careless mistakes, the mistakes that you shouldn't be making if you're a championship team. Denny Hamlin is a driver who's been relatively infamous for collecting more than his fair share of pit road speeding penalties over the years. I looked up data from 2016 and 2017. Across those 2 years, he had 15 speeding penalties. That's a pretty large number. In 2016 specifically, he had 10, which was by far the most in the series that year. I couldn't find an exact number for this year, 2018, but I know, he's had several at least that I can think of, and he's had some of them that have probably taken him out of contention to win some races. So these are mistakes that, while maybe it's not all in the driver, some of it's in how the team sets up the car and the dash and everything, but these are mistakes that you can't make if you're supposed to win a championship. And as we saw this last weekend at Las Vegas, it was a mistake that ultimately killed their points day. Not a pit road mistake, I understand, and I know they had a bad handling race car, but if you're Denny Hamlin late in the race, you really need to avoid spinning out. You need to just bring it home in 15th, 18th place, whatever you got to do to get the most amount of points. But spinning out and wrecking onto the infield grass really is not a mistake you can afford to make. So mistakes like that are what they really need to avoid. And if they can do that, I think they have a shot. 20 points is a pretty tough deficit, I know, but in the stage racing era, it's maybe a little bit better because now you have, you can collect more points per race. If he does well at Richmond this weekend, which is one of his best tracks, it's a hometown race for him, he could make big strides and get himself in a better position going into the Charlotte Roval. But the only way he's going to even have a chance at getting into that position is if he can eliminate the mistakes, which we've seen too many from him and his team this year or in recent years. So yeah, that's Denny Hamlin for you. Moving on, I'll look at the next lowest guy on the grid. Erik Jones is 19 points outside of the top 12. Erik Jones had a pretty good weekend at Las Vegas until the wreck. He started on pole. Looked like he had a top 5, maybe a top 10 car throughout much of the race, but towards the end of stage 2, Kevin Harvick blew a tire, slid right up into Jones. Jones had literally nowhere to go, was collected in the wreck, ended up finishing dead last in the race, which is the last thing you wanted to have happen, especially when you're Jones, who only had 5 bonus points coming into these playoffs and didn't get to the end of stage 2, so he didn't collect as many stage points as some other guys. So Erik Jones is in a tough spot. Really, when I think about it, he's kind of lucky to only be 19 points out. He's lucky that a lot of other drivers ran into issues, or else this deficit he's facing could be significantly worse. But despite this pretty big hole he finds himself in, how can Erik Jones manage to advance? Erik Jones can advance to the round of 12 if he can somehow manage to maintain that pre-playoffs momentum that he had. I mentioned this stat in an episode last week. Before the playoffs started, in the last 6 regular season races, Erik Jones had 4 top 5s, which is pretty tough to beat. And I saw a stat on NBC Sports this weekend that going back to his win at Daytona, so if you look at the last 9 regular season races before Las Vegas, he had the second best average finish out of anyone in the Cup Series. I'm talking about Erik Jones here. He's in his second year for JGR. He kind of flies under the radar. He only recently, just this summer, got his first career win, but he's up there outrunning Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., and some of the big 3 drivers that we've talked about this year. So he had a ton of momentum and it carried into Las Vegas. He won the pole, had a top 5, top 10 race car until that wreck happened. So Erik Jones can still advance. 19 points is not insurmountable, especially if they can get back to performing at the level they were, even before Las Vegas. Really, they just need to pretend like that wreck didn't happen. Don't act like that wreck didn't happen. Pretend in your heads that you finished 5th at Las Vegas and keep that momentum going, because they've been giving Jones some great race cars, and if they continue to give him race cars like they have been the last few months, I think he'll still advance. I think he'll have a good run at Richmond, and if he can just run top 10 at the Roval, he could be all right. But they got to continue that momentum because they had so much of it at their disposal. It's tough to talk about momentum because it's not really like a tactical, like actual physical thing. It's just kind of like a feeling that we get about somebody. But Erik Jones had about as much momentum as you could possibly have, so I think it's worth mentioning. Next on the list, we get to the Hendrick cars here. Chase Elliott is 14th on the grid currently. He is 9 points outside of the top 12. Chase Elliott, much like Erik Jones, ran into issues that were not of his own doing at Las Vegas while running inside the top 10, I believe. Jamie McMurray cut a tire and spun out right in front of him, and just like Erik Jones, Chase Elliott had nowhere to go to avoid him, ended up crashing into him, big damage. Did not finish the race. So he is 9 points out, which is significantly less than Erik Jones or Denny Hamlin, so he's definitely not got as deep of a hole to crawl out of. Chase Elliott can advance to the next round if he's able to replicate the run he had at the Richmond Spring race earlier this year. Chase Elliott had a great car here in the spring. It started second, finished second, and that was in the early months of the season when we all agreed Hendrick Motorsports did not look like their usual selves. Chase Elliott, though, had a great run in that race. And so this is really simple, but if Chase Elliott can bring whatever they had in the spring race here to the fall race, I think they could be in good shape. And I think it's pretty safe to say, kind of like Erik Jones, he'd had a lot of momentum before these playoffs started. He'd finished top 10, I think in 6 of the last 7 regular season races, so he'd been on almost as good or very similar type run as Erik Jones. That's why I had Chase Elliott going all the way to Homestead when I made my pre-playoffs picks, because he had so much momentum. He'd just been running so much better since the midsummer. And that's the key. Chase Elliott was great here in the spring, and I would say Hendrick Motorsports and that 9 car are better now than they were in the spring. So Chase Elliott doesn't have to win here at Richmond. He doesn't have to win. He's only 9 points out, but he needs a top 5, top 10, and I expect him to get one. So that's all I really got for him there. Let's move on to Jimmie Johnson. He is 6 points out of the top 12, 13th on the playoff grid. Jimmie Johnson, he's a big name. I know he hasn't had a great season this year, not by his typical standards. I had him moving on past this round because Hendrick Motorsports had been running a little bit better, and he'd had a lot of success at tracks like Vegas and Richmond, even recently. And honestly, my opinion on how Jimmie Johnson can advance is very similar to Chase Elliott's. Jimmie Johnson can advance to the next round if he's able to continue his recent short track strength. Jimmie Johnson, I believe, only has 1 top 5 this year. It may be 2 or 3, but it's less than like a couple fingers. If you look at his 3 best finishes this year, 2 of them have been at short tracks. He had a 3rd place run at Bristol earlier this year, and then he was 6th at Richmond. Bristol and Richmond are pretty different, but they're both short tracks that I think kind of showcase driver skill more than the car itself. And I think in a year where Jimmie Johnson has not had the best equipment, I think it's important for him to take advantage of tracks where driver skill matters, because there's no doubt Jimmie Johnson can wheel a dang race car. And so the fact that 2 of his best finishes this year have come at short racetracks like a Richmond, I think hopefully says a lot about their short track program and should give Jimmie Johnson, Chad Knaus, and the whole 48 team a certain amount of optimism coming into this really important race this weekend. I know he's only 6 points out, but he has not been as good as the guys behind him, like Chase Elliott and Erik Jones, and I tend to think Jones and Elliott will run up around the top 5, so that puts some pressure on Johnson to at least stay there and flirting with that top 10 maybe, to maintain pace. I'm optimistic by the fact that he did have a great run at Las Vegas going, looked like a top 5, top 10 car before he was, he got damaged on a restart and ultimately finished outside the top 20, I think. But hey, that's good momentum to have a good run at Las Vegas the week before. If they can bring some of that over and combine that with their short track strength we've seen in recent months, I think they'll be in good shape. It's all about setting yourself up for the Roval. Nobody knows what the Roval is going to have in store for us. Some drivers have said that more than half the field is going to likely wreck out. Some drivers have said, that this race is going to be absolute mayhem and chaos. So all bets are off. But for Jimmie Johnson, and I'll go and say for all four of these guys here at the bottom of the playoff grid, or even some of these bubble guys like, Alex Bowman, or up a little higher, I talked about Austin Dillon and Eric Almirola, who are in a good spot. All these drivers, it's all about making sure you're in a good spot, a good stable situation by the time we leave Richmond here this Saturday night. So there you have it. I've told you what those four drivers need to do to vault their way back up into playoff or championship consideration. We'll see if it works out for them. Before I end the show here, I want to talk about something that I've kind of observed the last few weeks especially, and I think a lot of us have probably noticed, but nobody's really solidly stated it, confirmed it or anything like that. But I think it's safe to say, especially with Brad Keselowski winning these last three races and just seeing kind of how the shift in power we've seen with race teams this year, I think it's safe to say that the big three is officially dead. This season's been full of narratives. They started the year off talking about the young guns, the young drivers, and then when they didn't do so well, we started talking about the big three because Kevin Harvick, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr. were dominating, winning every race under the sun, making everyone else look silly. But now, the last few weeks, Harvick hasn't really been winning. Kyle Busch hasn't won a race in a little while now. Martin Truex Jr. had a good car at Las Vegas, yes, but, they've been inconsistent. You look at Kurt Busch winning at Bristol. You look at Keselowski winning 3 races in a row. Go back to Jones and Chase Elliott finally breaking through and getting wins. It's safe to say that the big three are not as far ahead of the field as they were for most of the season. Sure, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, maybe Martin Truex are probably still the top 3 championship favorites at this point. They've had so many bonus points. They're probably going to mostly all cruise their way to Homestead. But I'd keep an eye on that 4th spot. Whoever gets that 4th spot at Homestead, whether it's Brad Keselowski or a Joey Logano or a Clint Bowyer or whoever, keep an eye on that person because I don't really feel like the big three is at the top of their game right now. And I can't tell if it's they've fallen back to the pack or if the pack has just finally caught up. It could be either. But I know Kyle Busch has gone from dominating race after race or running top 2 or 3 to, the last few races, he's had a 5th to 8th place car. I mean, think about it. Kevin Harvick, too. I mean, he dominated the Las Vegas race here in the spring, dominated that race. We had a lot of high expectations for him coming into this race last week. And he ran what? I think he led a few laps, but he was like a 4th, 5th place car and then cut a tire and wrecked. That's not really the Kevin Harvick or Kyle Busch that we've seen for most of this year. And we've gotten to see Larson, Kurt Busch, Keselowski, Logano all start to run up in that top 5. They're filling those spots up more, so it's not just the big three's playground anymore. And I think we've all noticed it, but nobody's really out there publicly stating it. I've noticed NBC Sports the last couple races has not really, mentioned the big three as much because I think they've noticed as well that Brad Keselowski and Team Penske have caught them. Some of the Stewart-Haas guys like Busch or Bowyer have caught up to Harvick. JGR, Erik Jones looks better than Kyle Busch on half these races. The big three, still very high championship favorites, probably still the 3 biggest favorites, but they're no longer way up here where it's like a done deal. It's not like the NBA where everyone knows the Warriors are going to the finals. Well, I guess it is. I think we all can agree that at least 2 of those 3 guys are going to make it to the final race. But like in the NBA, everyone knows the Warriors are going to win the championship. I don't know that Kyle Busch or Kevin Harvick or Martin Truex are going to win the championship. I picked Kyle Busch a couple weeks ago, but Brad Keselowski's starting to make me feel a little skeptical about that choice. Anyway, I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say. Do you guys think the big three is kind of... Have you guys noticed this? Have you guys noticed the big three kind of falling back to the pack? Or what do you guys think? You think they're saving something? Is it circumstantial? What do you guys have to say about it? Just let me know. I'd like to hear it. But anyway, yes, that is my show. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Instagram. All that fun stuff down below. You can support me directly by becoming a sponsor of the show, like these wonderful Patreon supporters right here. Thank you guys so much for the support. It means a ton to me. And if you want to find out how you can become one of those sponsors as well, check out that top link down below. I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone once again. Remember, this weekend, Friday night and Saturday night for the Xfinity and the Cup races. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is going to be racing in the Xfinity race this Friday night, so that should be exciting. Hopefully a few more eyeballs tune into that one. I think it's the playoff opener for the Xfinity series, but I'll definitely be interested to see how Dale Jr. does in his first time back in a race car in months, or almost a year now, so should be interesting. Of course, the Cup race Saturday night will be fun as well, if Vegas was any indication. Yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you guys are looking forward to that. I'll see you guys later this weekend. Bye-bye.